So, what is Brazil?
What is Brazil? Well, it's a really big country in South America, but I think more than anything, it's a place that's unique in its culture. Again, like I said before, it's the place that's always looking towards the future. Right now, Brazil is undergoing a lot of changes. Just this year, they are totally reforming their agriculture, which means that as that is the basis of their economy is expanding quite well. And hopefully, if there are some economic reforms, it'll be a more just society. But for now, what it remains is what it always has been, which is a place to find, natural beauty. I mean, Brazil has more beaches than any other country, more coastline of beaches than any other country in the world. A place of culture, the music, the varieties of music, the dance, capoeira, the art. All sorts of kinds of dances. It's amazing. So I think it has a lot to offer culturally and in the future, economically.
Is Brazil a state of mind, or is it?
That's an interesting question. I think every country has its own state of mind. I think there is generally a European state of mind, even though that every little country in Europe has its own differences. I think there's things that people value. In Europe, for instance, people value equality, generally. People value liberal ideas of social interactions. In South America, and specifically in Brazil, people value much more simple things because, most people don't have a great education. People just value treating each other well, and they value smiling at each other and just being friendly. And that sounds so trite, doesn't it? But it's really so powerful, When I left Brazil after living there 6 months, I remember I was riding on a boat up the Amazon, and I swear to God, there were 5 different kids, running around smiling and playing games, as we were going up the ocean, up the river. And there was a guy next to me, a Brazilian miner who went to work in one of those little countries up there next to Venezuela. And he came back, and all he did all day long was lay in his hammock and try and think up jokes. Like, it was so symbolic of all of Brazil, I think, because people there are just trying to do fun and good things, And they don't make great presumptions. Maybe their aspirations aren't too high, but they do accomplish something, They accomplish maybe a bit of happiness while they're still here.
Sometimes I say the remedy, the cure for everything in the United States, doesn't matter what's wrong with you, is Brazil. If you're overweight, go to Brazil. If you're not worked out, go to Brazil. If you're depressed, go to Brazil. If you're sad, if you've broken up with someone, go to Brazil. If the answer for everything is just go to Brazil.
Well, I think that's pretty powerful in the idea that, if you're caught up in some sort of dilemma, whether it's your weight or your, a relationship or whatever, go back to nature. I think you're right. In a lot of ways, Brazil does represent nature. There's a lot of great nature you can see and experience and be a part of, like at the coastline or like the national forests or Foz do Iguaçu, which is like the world's biggest waterfalls. Or there's the Amazon jungle, which is a million different stories all in one. But also, what I think you mean is that you really get back to the nature of a person, Whereas here, we look at everyone in such an economical way. And what can you do for me? What is your purpose in being here? How can I use you to further myself? It's just, even if you're not thinking in those terms, you are thinking in those terms. It's a very U.S. thing. But down there, it's so cliche, but it's so true. What can I do for you? Do you want something to drink? Where do you come from? Let's talk. Let's just talk. Let's just talk. It's so powerful just talking to people with an open heart. And that's what Brazil is to me.
Exactly. In this country, everyone at a party is like, where do you work? What do you do? Where do you live?
And it's amazing that in a place like Brazil, those issues come up, but it's not in a, let's say, a judgmental way, I don't know. It's funny because when I think back to I spent a total of about 10 months, 11 months in Brazil. I don't remember what I talked about a lot, I just talked to people. And you just were present in your own life for a minute, And it's really weird, isn't it? I mean, I don't remember really what I talked about except for that I love this song, or I went and saw this spectacle, or isn't the sunset beautiful, or who cares, you know? So yeah, I mean, people look at each other in a very different way.
What about all the poverty, the starvation, the children begging, coming up to you, wanting money, wanting food?
It's funny, and there are a lot of aspects to that. I mean, it's funny, it's sad, I don't mean it's funny. I mean, it's funny that in Brazil it's different than I think it is in other countries. And I really do mean that. I've seen a lot of poverty. I've been to Africa, South America, various countries. And, you know, poverty's ugly anywhere, but... And there it's a huge problem. They have a humongous divide between rich and poor. You know, a little bit worse than our own country. We have a lot of problems here too. But there, I'll never forget, the difference was there was an innocence in the poverty to a certain extent. You know, like, people would ask you for money and it wasn't aggressive, and it was sometimes, but generally it wasn't. It was somebody who was out of luck, you know, and even if, this sounds really strange, but even if they were stealing from you, it was like a joke. It was like, it wasn't meant to hurt you. It was like, I've had kids try to pickpocket me, and I'll catch them, and they'll kind of smile, you know, and they'll kind of be like, sorry, and it's baffling to see that for the first time, but after a while, you understand where that's coming from, you know. It's yeah, they lack shame, but you know, hey, why should they be so shameful in a sense, you know? There's something about that I can't explain.
I mean, Sao Paulo is now the biggest city maybe in the world if you count all of the... I mean, it's so packed and so...
It's a disaster, you
yeah,
know, like a lot of
unbelievable.
big... I mean,
so
frankly,
polluted.
you know, I love South America. I love a lot of different things about it, but I'll tell you that all the big cities are a dump.
Yeah.
You know, to mostly. You know, there's always a nice region where the money is, and you know, it's in the smaller places that you find the real charm, and that's what a lot of tourists to Brazil miss out on. They go to Rio thinking they're going to find, you know, Carmen Miranda with fruit on her head, and that's going to be their postcard, you know. But that, you know, Rio is great, but it's not everything, and it's a huge city, and it can be ugly. And you know, I always had the best times in the smallest places, because that's where you, like we were talking about, you find humanity, and you find people that just live with very basic and powerful principles.
They've just been completely devastated with overpopulation. There were 70 million Brazilians in 1970. Now there's 180 million in 2000. There's going to be 225 million by 2012 or 15. When the Pope was down there, it's the largest Catholic country. In 1980, he didn't tell them wear condoms. He had 200,000 people in the stadium. I mean, it's unbelievable how much poverty is created by this people with 36 children, yeah. 22 children, 27, 25, 13 children. 1% of the Brazilian population, almost 1%, is living in the United States.
Yeah, I mean, population is a big problem, and it's funny how you mentioned the Pope, because just the other day, who was it? Who's not Margaret Jimenez?
Oh yeah.
Who was it?
Adriana Calcanhoun. No.
Daniela Mercury.
Yes.
Who is like a UN. I mean, she like is a UN representative for some sort of world aid or something like that, right? She's quite a nice post she's got for herself, even though she's a popular singer in Brazil, and. She couldn't get an audience with the Pope because she advocated people using condoms, you know, when one of her goals and her position was to stop the spread of AIDS. You know, and yeah, you know, it's a disaster. I mean...
Well, they were going to have a concert, and first she was invited, and then they disinvited her. I mean, that's the bureaucracy of that Vatican is so bureaucratic, you know, some person sitting in a post. But... I read the whole story. It's very convoluted and sad.
Let's talk about something else.
Yeah. Einstein was in Brazil in 1929, and he said it was the space-time between heaven and hell.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. You know, when I think to Brazil, you know, every tourist has his own memories. You know, you remember the great places you've been and the people you've met and all that good stuff, but then you also remember the grand scheme of the poverty and the wealth that surrounds you. And You know, it is quite amazing. And the thing is that I think what maybe Einstein meant was that, yeah, there's the hell of all that poverty and all that that inequality, but the heaven of the people's attitude towards it, because it's such a peaceful country. I mean, they have no enemies. They have no enemies, and they've had no enemies for so long. They're the only country in the history of the world to have built the capability of making an atom bomb, and then disassembled it because they thought, we're never going to use the atom bomb. What the hell do we need it for? You know, why be aggressive? Why have, you know? It's a phenomenon that, to me, you know, speaks tones.
I didn't know that. That's very interesting. One of the first trips to Brazil, when I was coming back, I met these guys from Orange County, and they were taking all of the tags off of their luggage that said Rio on it. And I'm like, what are you, like, they were frantic about it. And I'm like, what are you guys doing? And they said, well, we told our girlfriends we were going to Chicago.
That is good.
And they said that they had like 8 guys and 13 girls, and it turned out one of them was a guy, in a hotel room, and that they had spent more in like 5-6 days, just each one of them, than I spent in a month staying in Brazil, because they were just burning through money and doing all the bad things that North Hemisphere tourists do. And I mean, there's so many stories you just experience when you're over there. And I met this incredible, beautiful older woman who, when she was 19, she was sitting on the beach playing songs with Caetano Veloso in Salvador, and she's been married 3 times, one to a Peruvian, once to a person from Uruguay or Argentina, and she was so verbal, and we sang to each other, and it was great. There's so many incredible people. Everyone's so individual. And I met a man who had 4 sons, and I said, oh, you know, you're so blessed to have all these kids. And he goes, I had to spend so much money. And when he put his arm around his one son, he goes, I had a car, and I had to sell my first car to put him through school. And then he put and then I got another car, worked hard, and got another car. This story's not going.
Well, you can't tell stories. You're not the one on camera.
Yeah. Go ahead.
This is a completely useless film right now.
No, because it's recording the sound and your reactions. But anyway. Tell us a story. Love. They just aren't afraid of their emotions. They're not afraid of jumping into love. Here, we like hoard our emotions. We're used to hoarding money. We're used to hoarding everything, saving it, keeping it, protecting it. And then you start to do that with love. But it destroys your ability to have love. With love, you have to just jump into it and throw yourself into it.
Yeah, and honestly, I think the Brazilians are... Well, let me tell you something else. I think also in corners of Brazil you find things that you might not expect to find anywhere, let alone in Brazil. You know, I'll never forget, in my last few months in Brazil, I ended up in a place called Florianopolis in the south. And it's kind of, you know, a higher class sort of city in Brazil. And there was this one place, this new establishment called La Confraria, A Confraria das Artes, which just meant like, I don't even know what that means. It's sort of like a coming together of arts. And it's a gallery, and it's this beautiful, beautiful restaurant bar. And it was one of the most unique places I ever went to. And the only reason I ever got in there was because I was, I guess, white, and I used a model back then. But usually you couldn't get in there. It was hard to get in, and it was like this special club of people. And it was the most craziest thing, because you had in one corner of the room, and I'm not exaggerating here, in one corner of the room you had the models, you know, the female models, male actors, great. And I shouldn't say corner, because they're all mixed together. And then you would have the titans of industry. I mean, I'm talking to one guy, and he owns all the cinemas, or like one of the companies that owns, like, let's say, 1/3 of all the cinemas in Brazil. You know, then you're talking to some other guy, and he's like, oh yeah, I own this airline. You know, ridiculous. And then, you know, the next guy over here, you're not really too sure, but you're pretty sure that he's part of the mafia, and so it's like the mafia table over here. And then literally, there's like, or at least there's rumors of that, you know, there's cops kind of undercover in here, and it was like every little aspect sort of the weird upper class of Brazil. You know, that the people that make things move, but that you never see. You know, is in this one little restaurant bar, and in South Brazil, and it was phenomenal. And you never really knew who you were talking to. You know, it could all be just a sham. And that's where I met a few actresses and everything, and had a great time. But
yeah,
it was an amazing place. And even the guy who decorated it was he was Brazilian, but he traveled all over the world, and he had this eclectic, crazy assemblage of just artifacts and paintings and upholstery and furniture from all over the world. It was the most phenomenally eclectic place, you know, just like its customers.
Yeah, I like that in Brazil. When you're talking about a company, most of the time it's just like a man or a man and his son, that the family still owns the whole gigantic company. Whereas here in the US, that was 70 years ago or 100 years ago, and now it's 5,000 employees or 300 managers, VPs and things that have this kind of terrible control. And there it's just an individual.
Well, yeah, you mean, you know, and that's funny. It makes me think, you know, I'm trying to remember the kinds of companies they had there, and everything is just so without law and without rule, you know. You make a purchase at a company, and you think there's some sort of policy governing your purchase. Once the money's changed hands, there's no going back, you know. There are no rules. There liability, what's that, you know? It's you have to be clever, you know, let's say, unless of course you fall into the same tourist traps that everyone does and everything's already prearranged for you and you never see anything of the real Brazil. But if you really get out there and you go to the smaller cities and you go to the villages, and if you go to even just certain parts of regular cities, you know, you'll find that commerce is completely different. Transactions are on a, I don't know, everything is so unplanned. Everything is just, it just
ad
happens.
hoc.
Yeah, the whole way of life is ad hoc, you know, relationships, buying anything, things like supermarkets, you know, it's like, it's a weird concept there. You almost don't feel comfortable in a big supermarket because you're used to everything being so small time. You're used to buying from the corner grocer, you know, the farmer. So
one of the things I love about Brazil is the beach and the ocean, the warm water, the sun. I mean, there's 7,000 kilometers of beach. It's people don't realize it's just a giant sandbox. It's like, and the adults all go to the beach every day. A lot of them, and the people that live close to the beach. And
I'm getting tired. I have nothing to say about beaches.
We're almost out of.
What can I say about beaches? What am I going to say?
What about swimming in the ocean?
I gotta say, that's one of the most amazing things that happened to me in Brazil, was when I started swimming in the ocean. And, you know, my story is a lot different than everyone else's is going to be. I had a lot of free time in Brazil. I had a job I took with me. But I had free time, and I started just swimming in the ocean, because in the north of Brazil, the water is always warm and always calm because there's so many coral reefs. And I would just make it my duty, you know, my obligation to every day swim as far as I could. And I had a friend who taught me how to swim a little bit, got my form better, and I would just go, and then, you know, usually I'd be swimming for 2 hours a day, and it was a phenomenal peace, you know, that you can find in doing that. And it's something that's hard to do here because there's so many waves in California, but good old days.
When are you going back?
Well, if I'm lucky, going back next summer, but then it'll be winter there. Maybe winter break in a year. I hate to wait a year, but, you know, I have to go back.
If a plane ticket costs $700 to get to Brazil, how much do you need to live for 1 month, 3 months, 6 months?
Well, it depends on how you live.
If you live the simplest you can, like a student, like...
Well, if you want to live as simple as you can and still have fun in Brazil, I'd say you could probably get by on about $800 a month. It's gotten a little bit more expensive now. Depends on where you are, but you could, $800 could serve you well.
That includes food, travel, buses,
Well, it depends.
basic posada hotels,
That just includes all you need to get by and have a decent time.
food, shelter, clothing,
Yeah.
entertainment,
Mhm.
transportation.
Mhm. Let's stop this. I'm done. I'm tired, Mike.
What was the longest kiss you ever had in Brazil?
Please.